Good morning, thank you. I think we're going to make a start now. Welcome to Big Screen, Little Screen. We have the next 90 minutes, if we want it, to discuss what is the growing market for non-fiction feature film content in cinemas. So that's documentaries, that's operas, that's ballet, that's rock music. There's quite a lot of confusion around the terminology and the content itself at the moment, and hopefully we'll try and sort of unpick that a little bit in the session. There's specialised film, as it used to be called, still is in some quarters. There's definitely what used to be called alternative content. And there's a new term which has emerged in the cinema industry in the last 18 months probably, which is I think is going to stick, which is what everyone is calling event cinema.
I don't like it.
There we go. First controversial statement of the morning. We have a distinguished panel who are going to introduce themselves to you in a moment, and then each one is going to show you a reel of their work and tell us a little bit about where they fit into the picture we're going to look at. Then what we're going to do is have some debate on the panel between us for 30-40 minutes, and then we'll throw it open to the floor. So there'll be a roving microphone somewhere, and we will be done by 12:15. So I think the first thing for me to do is just spend maybe a couple of minutes trying to set some context here and just try and maybe understand what this session is really going to be about. And I think sort of making some notes this morning, I think the first thing to just be very clear about is that the reason we're all in the room today, fundamentally, when you strip everything else away, is about technology. This is about what's happened in the digital world inside cinema over the last decade or so, that explains really why we're seeing this growth in non-fiction feature films. And this is essentially physical, and it's about the fact that projectionists no longer have to struggle taking 35mm reels of film on and off projectors and lacing them and splicing them. And anyone who's ever tried to do that knows that that is not a process that is conducive to fast and flexible programming inside cinemas. And we've now moved into a world where, at the touch of a button, you can literally swap out your 3 p.m. screening of Gravity for a one-off screening about the new Matisse exhibition at the Tate. And that's the kind of bedrock that has changed everything around the exhibition paradigm in the last decade or so. About 90% of Britain's 3,900 screens are now fully digital, and I don't think anyone really, in any of the mature markets around the world, expects distributors to be shipping film by 2016 probably. I think it's over, and we'll be in a fully digital universe. And that change is what's driving the ability of cinemas to become interested in films that can be distributed outside of the traditional distribution model that we know and love or hate around feature films. I think the second point I'd make is rather more about economics. It's just a simple fact that cinemas, on average across the world, have relatively low occupancy rates if you look across the week. That obviously at the peak times they're rammed, but we've all been to cinemas at 3 o'clock on a Tuesday afternoon. You know what they tend to look like. And what that means essentially is that for exhibitors, the ability to offer niche product, if you like, for dedicated audiences in specific slots that is well advertised and well marketed, optimizes each screening slot for the cinema, and it helps to drive the cinema's revenue. So for documentary makers and specialised filmmakers, I think there's a real opportunity there. And to put it crudely, I think you can begin to look at multiplex sites rather like you would look at an old-fashioned cable network. A 10-screen cinema is 10 channels that can be filled with different types of content. There's another model in the exhibition sector which is much more about the kind of specialised cinemas that tend to cater for more upscale audiences. They tend to have better, stronger, deeper relationships with their customers, and I think they represent a different type of opportunity for filmmakers. And I think Claire can probably talk about that with more expertise than most. But here's the thing: this is not like the birth of Channel 4 for filmmakers. This is not about the creation of a sort of whole new panoply and massive new budget for a new stream of content. I think if you start to go back to the statistics and look at it, in the UK overall, only about 25% of the releases in Britain go to British movies. And that would include Harry Potter, James Bond, etc., etc. There are about 700 different films released in the UK each year at the moment. And the top 5 movies, The Hobbits and the Despicable Me 2s, etc., they get 80 to 85% of all of the box office. So if you want to look at it another way, last year, in 2013, 430 of the releases into UK cinemas, 430 separate releases, took less than 50 grand each at the UK box office, just to get it into perspective. And then when you start to drill down into that and say, well, what does that mean for documentary films in the cinemas? Specifically, documentary films last year, actually not last year, in 2012, took £5.9 million in total at the UK box office. So that's a 0.5% market share that came from 86 separate films. So there's a kind of real polarization here. And in terms of the specialized films, every now and again, as we know, there is a breakout hit. There is a Searching for Sugar Man, there is a Man on Wire, and that seems to have quite a significant effect on the overall numbers. But I think part of this discussion is also about trying to get in perspective how big this opportunity is. That said, it is clearly a real opportunity. It's a growth area. There's a growing interest from cinemas for this kind of content for the reasons I've just talked about, which means potentially there is also money arriving on the table from distributors and financiers who are prepared to come into projects. So hopefully we can talk about that a little bit too. And that's a good thing. But inevitably what that brings is perhaps another layer of tastemakers, commissioning editors, in association with producers, and that kind of layer of opinion that as filmmakers you then have to work with and appease to an extent. So I think it'd be interesting if we can get into that discussion a little bit too. But the purpose of today basically is to try and understand this space. What sort of content do cinemas want? Why do they want it? What makes a non-fiction feature-length piece of content cinematic, i.e. not telly? What are the artistic and creative challenges around that process? And also, how does that model fit alongside the needs and the requirements of other investors? Particularly, I'm thinking about the big beasts, the public service broadcasters and the broadcasters who have particular interests in factual programming. So it'd be good to try and explore how those two pieces of the jigsaw work together. And then if we have time, we'd also like to tease out as best we can perhaps what do deals look like in this space. So that's kind of the background and the agenda. First of all, let's meet our expert panel, who will introduce themselves and their show reel. So could we start with Foxtrot Films, please?
Well, my name's Maureen Murray, and I've been working with Margie Kinmonth. Together, we own a company called Foxtrot Films. The company really exists as a vehicle to show the work which Margie produces and directs, and which I help her get made. So that's the background of Foxtrot Films. And we have a little Foxtrot show reel, so it's really combining, as it were, both our backgrounds and work. So I'll hand you over to Margie to say a little bit more about that.
Well, I think in relation to this session, obviously, like a lot of people, I have always felt very inspired by the cinema, and just a little nugget. I started my life as a cinema projectionist, running these carbon arc projectors that you're describing here. So it's kind of amazing to come this round circle and to the digital age. Anyway, in relation to what we're going to show you, we've picked out some of the clips of films that we've successfully got into the cinema, and it's been an incredible experience. Because obviously I do a lot of work for television, but we had this ambition. So we're relative newcomers on the block of the, this potential for showing films in the cinema, and it's been great. So we've got some stories we can tell you. And
so we could say a little bit about the clips, Margie.
Yeah, one of the things that started this off was I was making a film with the Prince of Wales about, which was really came from his interest in art. And so he wanted to make this film with me about his interest in watercolour, which was a tiny subject, but it touched greatly on the landscape and his relationship with the landscape and his relationship with his own family history. And so from a little idea grew quite a big story, and it had an actual story in it. I think, to make a cinema film, you have to have a decent story with breadth of storytelling and emotion, landscape, opportunity for music, and the breadth that cinema brings. So that was really what inspired it, and this opened in the cinemas, and it went all over the place. It went to the Moscow Film Festival, and this has been a role model. But I went around the country doing Q&As, and I learnt a great deal from the cinema, the local cinemas and the managers, and how they bring in the audiences, which was really exciting. I mean, some of the cinemas were not very full, others were absolutely jammed. So I kind of learnt that it was a very specific audience, and felt very excited. And so the next film, which I've just made, which is not showing at Sheffield, but it's premiering next week at the Moscow Film Festival, is about the museum, the Hermitage Museum in St. Petersburg. And I've been making that film, well, on and off for 2 or 3 years. It's been quite a challenging experience to work with the Russians. And so we're going to show you a little trailer of that, and that's opening in September all over the world, which we're doing in association with Arts Alliance, and it's been really exciting. We're very, very excited about it. And so you're going to see the trailer for that.
And then we have a clip from Looking for Lowry, which is a film that we had originally intended to make for cinema, and I've included it in the clip reel because it's an interesting example of something that's intended to be for cinema and then eventually went on television instead. So that was an interesting one. And then I think we've got a clip from a film that Margie directed a few years ago about the Mariinsky Theatre, and that was shown in some cinemas. And I think finally a film that you did a long time ago called Remember the Secret Policeman's Ball. And that was a film that you did with Amnesty that was shown in certain cinemas as well.
I mean, it was quite interesting choosing the clips, because, you look at your earlier work and you think, oh, well, that was something, I won the RTS for that, let's look at that and try and put it in. And then you think, gosh, it feels very dated, but also you think it would never get commissioned. And yet there was a film I made about Francis Bacon that was very similar to The Imposter, which is a very dark story, and if I'd made it this year, it would have opened in the cinema. So there's these things bouncing around quite nicely.
We may see a bit of The Imposter in a little while as well.
Yeah.
Great. Can we run the Foxtrot showreel, please?
Behind the well-known public face of the British monarchy lies a story previously untold on film.
Every now and then you inherit something special which gives an extra edge to the whole thing.
were on a journey with the Prince of Wales to reveal the dozens of artists in the royal family tree who have left an extraordinary treasure trove of art spanning 5 fascinating centuries.
Looking through Queen Victoria's sketchbooks, I mean, some of them are really remarkable, I think. Others of her children were really very good, as you'll see.
They did actually pursue it to a point in which they wanted to be sort of as good as a professional.
Do you think, how did I do that? Which part of me has it come from?
Something about Lowry. I think he's one of the major figures of 20th century English art. There's no doubt about that. But there's something about eccentricity, loneliness, people who have a very quirky vision of life. And the thing about Lowry is he did have a vision of the world.
I have friends who say, oh, we people watch. Well, he was the king of people watching. But you didn't know. He didn't stare at them. Fascinating. He was very clever at it.
But there was a great snobbery against Lowry. He was detested and despised by everybody else except the people who liked what they called the stick people. And I think he was considered half-witted.
I find it amazing that an artist has got that much of a strong identity is not accepted, because surely that's what art is all about, you know. It's reflecting real life and you know what it is when you see it, kind of thing.
The thing that makes Lowry so popular is the same thing that stops him from being the subject of serious critical attention, that what attracts so many people is a sort of sentimentality about him.
Lowry is a great painter because he makes us see things differently. And if anyone can do that, they get my vote.
Very, very difficult periods of First World War in Russia, then very, very rich, very strong, but yet very dramatic years, which followed 1917.
The great advantage, of course, of doing sketches with Peter is that he's going to come in and drive you mad, but you're going to have a newspaper with all the lines in it, you see. So I have the entire script in here.
See how far it has to go, the food? 4 miles at 1 mile an hour. This means none of the food that reaches your stomach is ever really fresh.
Why amnesty? It's all about freedom of speech.
I always said, like, those were the
A-list. That the Pythons gave it, actually, I think, initially. I think that's what it was.
Yeah, I don't think we'd save a donkey. Sorry. Unless the career's slipping. I may actually save a donkey in the next few years. I always said you can see where your career is by what charities you're asked to do. Like, AIDS is good,
your number.
Amnesty is good, but like save an aardvark, forget it.
Great, thank you. That was the producer's intro, so we're moving to the broadcasters. Celia.
Hi, I'm Celia Taylor, I'm head of Factual at Sky. We, for about the last 18 months, have been working with producers and distributors and all sorts of co-production partners to try and bring a strand to our customers, which we play on Sky Atlantic. It's called Sky Atlantic Documentary Films, and they are all cinema-released documentaries, so one of the few broadcasters who operate in that territory. We run them in 2 seasons, and our second season is actually currently on air at the moment. So I'm just going to show you a promo that we use to promote the season, and so in it's got pretty much all the films in this batch. So if you can run the VT.
Cartooning meant more to me than just doing funny pictures. It meant to change things for the better.
All the children, all the women have HIV, except the cook and myself.
His new job as Defense Secretary is a means of putting Rumsfeld in the running for the vice presidency.
If that decision had gone a slightly different way, you would have been president of the United States.
That's possible.
If they are to die, then they should die with somebody by their side.
I'd always thought I wanted to change the world. Now was the moment.
True stories, real drama. Sky Atlantic's acclaimed documentary season returns, starting with For No Good Reason, coming this June to Sky Atlantic HD.
Thank you. And final panel member, Claire Binns.
So I'm involved with programming and acquisitions for Picture House Cinemas. We've got 20 cinemas in the UK. We're opening another one at the end of the year in East Dulwich. We're also opening another 4 next year, actually. What we are also heavily involved with is alternative content, which is now called event cinema. I don't think we have found a good name for it yet, and we've been at the forefront of that really since the Metropolitan Opera came into the UK. We're going to be releasing the last night of the Monty Python show, which is taking place at the O2 in July, and we're doing that globally in 2,000 screens. So we're really part of the whole chain of what's happening in exhibition of films and alternative content. And I think we've got a couple of clips of films that we have released in the last 18 months, 2 years, just to give you a taste of what we do.
And I will take one light as well. So it's 3:05. We have 1 hour.
Silence, please. Please don't move. It looks as if it had been done yesterday. We're going to listen to the silence in the cave, and perhaps we can even hear our own heartbeats.
The birthday girl. Isn't she beautiful? And here is her brother, Nick.
We don't know what's happened to him. It gives you nightmares. I just gotta go get him and get him back here where he's safe.
We had no idea what kind of person we were getting. They look very different.
He disappeared without a trace. Tonight, a San Antonio boy is back home.
When a child is missing for years, either the child is dead or the child is not found.
There was just something wrong about it.
Something was being hidden, and I didn't know what that was.
The FBI is not taking this case lightly.
There was something going on.
He couldn't speak English without an accent.
Maybe he's not Nicholas Barkley.
We didn't need to prove who he was.
This was their family member. I mean, no one would be wrong about something like that.
Wait a minute. What has he done?
This must be a very dangerous person.
A story so bizarre, it's hard to believe it's true.
I mean, seriously.
Trust you in my home, you rascal, you. Glad when you're dead, you rascal, you.
Great. I want to see the imposter again.
Yes,
Thank you. Okay, my turn finally. So I work at Arts Alliance, and just to give you a minute on the Arts Alliance, we're basically an investment fund based in London. And what we do in a fairly sort of proactive way is invest in businesses and entrepreneurs and help people grow their business. And we have a number of investments in the film and media and digital technology space. Indeed, we were up until a while ago one of the investors in Picture House cinemas. But more specifically, in terms of what's going on today, I think there are two companies that are of particular interest to this audience. One is we own a digital cinema business, which is nearly 10 years old, called Arts Alliance Media, which was at the forefront of on a global basis of driving the switch over from 35mm to digital distribution. And AAM is essentially a hardware, software solutions and financing solutions business that has worked through this very complicated VPF structure, which has essentially been a massive kind of subsidy to the cinema sector to get a fast transition from analog to digital. Along the way, Arts Alliance Media developed a business which was essentially distribution, physical distribution and marketing of event cinema, alternative content. To complement that, about 18 months ago, we set up another company called Mr. Wolf. Mr. Wolf is a production financing company. And basically, Mr. Wolf specializes in music and arts content, ranging from kind of opera to ballet to rock music to Matisse. And we don't make films ourselves inside Mr. Wolf. We work with independent production companies to make the kind of films that we want to see go into cinemas and be part of our slate. So essentially, if you want to think about Arts Alliance, the way to think of us is an organisation that co-finances event cinema in the culture and arts space in the broadest sense. We distribute the content, we will market the content, and we will collect the revenues, and we will hand back what is owed to the producers and other financiers. And here is our show reel.
All my life
life I've been searching for something. Something never comes, never leads to nothing. Nothing satisfies, but I'm getting close, closer to the prize at the end of the road.
Well, we got to do something with our lives.
Nel dolce incanto del mattino a Portofino I found my love.
Are you mad?
Cry! Don't for Harry! Kiss me, Kate! We will be married on Sunday!
You don't tell anyone all the darker side of things, but you have a chemistry that no one else in the world has. So we don't mess with it.
You had a sign that said, "Can the king sing with the boss?"
The girl in front of me screamed, "He wants you on a stage!"
We're here for one reason, because you're here.
This is the best.
Thank you from the bottom of my heart.
Okay, so there's a taster of a smorgasbord of content. Should we just dive straight in? Let's just try and drill into, in a more specific now way. What sort of content now do cinemas want? And how does that fit and sit alongside co-financing and co-production opportunities with traditional broadcasters? Claire, do you want to tell us what Picture House is looking for?
Well, 17% of our business is now non-film, so that's event cinema, which is a growing proportion of our business. What we want, I mean, we have a certain agenda in that the cinemas we have always been cinemas that have, they're curated, so we do pick and choose, but at the same time the customer is very much able to pick and choose now, whether they go online or the way that they choose to see something on a television screen or in a cinema. So I think the big turning point for a lot of people was when Doctor Who was shown in cinemas and on TV, and that took £1.8 million at the box office just on TV. So what I would say is everything's changing, and it's changing week by week as to what customers want. We've recently invested in a website called Our Screen, which then that allows customers to go into Our Screen on the website, book a film, get the crowd to come and see the film. The slot is in a physical cinema so that they can actually choose how to program the cinema with a film of their choice. So it's shifting all the time, and we're really just there to enable, but also to say wrestling isn't suitable for us, but Royal Opera House is suitable for us, and it's about working out which slots and when and how our customers want to see it. I mean, John's absolutely right. Daytimes are always a struggle for cinema, but we actually find now that there's a growing audience for what we call encores, which actually are repeat screenings of live events that we've had, and we can be getting 50 to 150 people in on 2 o'clock on a Tuesday afternoon to see a repeat of a Royal Shakespeare performance or an NT live performance, because it has a particular audience. And I think that's the other thing, is that there are niche audiences out there who might be interested in cooking or golf or cycling, who, if they find out about something, will rush to the cinema to see it. I think the trick we have going forward, before I shut up, is that we all need to, broadcasters and filmmakers and people who are putting on concerts, all need to be much more joined up, because there's an appetite for everything on different platforms, and we are not being smart enough yet about joining up, talking to each other, so that why can't we show the 5 episodes of Borgen and then the 6th one go out live at cinemas and on TV? People aren't thinking long-term enough to make the opportunities work for everybody. So I think that's where we've still got a lot of work to do.
Okay, so we should come back to that. So there's, in a sense, there's 2 issues there. One is probably about windows, a ghastly phrase, but everyone in the cinema business likes to talk about it. And the other one is really about distribution patterns. I mean, Doctor Who was a simulcast, wasn't it?
Yes.
It was on TV.
It was on
at the
TV.
Same time it was in the cinema.
We, I think, had 1 minute of extra footage. So we had something that would make it special. Originally, it was going to be more than that. But the idea is to get people in cinemas, you do have to have something that is going to make it attractive for people to leave the house and go and buy a cinema ticket. So you can have Doctor Who on in the cinemas, but you need something else that says, right, I'll go and see it at the cinema and not on TV.
Right, so the equivalent, crudely, of the DVD bonus extras.
Absolutely.
Okay. So, Celia, how does it look from your perspective at Sky?
I mean, I think this, I mean, we've been doing a whole variety of things. I mean, we were one of the first broadcasters that we transmitted live opening of the Leonardo exhibition. And put that into 42 cinemas around Britain, which completely sold out, apart from one, I think, which had opened the day before, so nobody just knew it was there. So that was, I mean, for us, I mean, we did that because we were working in partnership with an institution, and we wanted to bring that to our customers because we knew that Sky Arts viewers would absolutely clamour to see that. And also, I think sometimes, you know, if you've been to a very, very packed exhibition, it is really hard to see the work. So I think quite a lot of audience, especially the regional audiences and certain people who want to actually properly experience an exhibition, came to the cinema to see that, and we simultaneously transmitted it on Sky Arts, and we ran packages around it, and we interviewed the key people involved in it, and we had a presenter, Tim Marlowe did it. So we were able to add extra to the actual experience of queuing to see the paintings. And I think what's interesting, we got very excited about that, and I think we were very leading the field. And then, interestingly, what happened very quickly and rather annoyingly is that the institutions just started doing it themselves, straight into the cinemas, which was great. And the fact that it sort of proved our point, and we proved that there was an audience for this. And I think, going back to your point, I think traditionally there's always been a kind of a split between cinema distribution and television, and they just weren't friends. And I think it's like somehow television spoils it for the cinema, somehow we're ruining their marketing plans, and I just think the world has changed so much. You know, people watch our content on iPads, they watch it on downloads, they do access material in all sorts of different ways, and I think people are pretty agnostic about it. And I think that's the thing that I would like to see, is, as you say, a much closer collaboration and an understanding that actually what you want for your content is to reach the biggest audience that you possibly can in the most direct way you can. And also we can all leverage each other's marketing. You know, the amount of reach we can get for a film or a documentary across all our Sky platforms by promoting it and talking about it and having a campaign can only help cinemas. And I just think we've just got to get over that historic divide that somehow we were detrimental to each other's business, and I think we can be a positive impact on each other's businesses. So we're really keen to do more of it, but it's you're having to break some quite serious walls down, and I think obviously with people like you it's much easier, but when you start talking to the studios, you know, you might as well just start claiming your old age pension now, because it's probably going to take that long before you can get anywhere. It's very difficult.
And just to be a bit more granular about it, I mean, I say that and then be more granular, but also to generalise a bit. Looking at the Sky reel, and push this back to Claire, I hadn't seen the reel before, but I was seeing Ralph Steadman, I was seeing Donald Rumsfeld, I was seeing Jesus Tower, which looked like a cult, a film about a cult.
Yes, yeah. Well, it's a little town in America that puts on the Christian pageant, and the whole town does it. And the boy who's cast as Jesus Christ becomes a Buddhist, and so basically has to confess to this very devout town that he's playing Christ, but it's actually Buddhist. It's very funny.
Great. On the face of it, Claire, of those three, which would you take? Any of them, all of them?
Well, we had long discussions about the Ralph Steadman. Actually, I mean,
you loved it, didn't you?
Yeah, I really loved it, and it did have a slight cinema release last week, not very successfully. I actually think that we need to talk a lot more about how we do this, because I think there are opportunities to have those films in cinemas, but I think we've got to talk earlier, and I think we have to work out a strategy to do it, because we want to show the best of everything to our customers and give them that choice. And what Sky is doing is absolutely some of the best stuff you can get in documentaries. So realistically, we've just got to make sure that we set up something that allows us both to make that worthwhile for each other and therefore for customers.
And I think, most broadcasters don't want the theatrical. I mean, HBO don't want the theatrical. I mean, they do theatrical only because they want to win prizes. They don't actually really care about the properly distributing a film. So, I mean, it's interesting. I mean, the history of it, I mean, we came at this strategy very early on as TV commissioners. And as TV, so our rights position and our kind of relatively strong rights position, we were fully funding or co-producing, we expected the rights that we had, and we wanted exclusivity, and we were quite sort of TV about it. And very quickly we realised that if we wanted to get the best films and we wanted to attract the best talent, that was completely the wrong way round. So there's a very sort of practical reason why we changed that. And then also, I think from our customers' point of view, it goes on Sky Atlantic, which has some of the biggest global television brands out there, like Game of Thrones and Mad Men and all these other things. So it's very important for our customers to understand that our factual documentary content on Sky Atlantic is as good as those brands. And one of the ways to prove that to them was commercial, viable, critical, award-winning, festival-winning content. So it became very clear to us very quickly that actually we really needed and wanted our films to be successful and proven in the market. So we could really claim that to our audience, that we really are bringing you the best global documentaries. So it was quite an interesting transition, and I didn't actually tell upstairs that we were changing our strategy, because I just thought, they'll just make it really difficult for me, and they don't really understand, and they've got bigger things to worry about. So we just started doing it anyway, and then once it started working, they kind of came on board, thankfully. So sometimes you just got to do it,
Can I just mention one thing, though, that what it boils down to, though, is you do not make money from theatrical small distribution. John said that what percentage of films take under £50,000? If you have a film that takes £50,000 that you distribute, you lose money. It's as simple as that. You lose money. It costs money to release films in cinemas.
It used to be, I mean, you used to make that back on DVDs, but
yeah,
that
absolutely.
DVD market is
the DVD
now.
Market's gone. So it's
and the online market's not replaced that as a revenue stream.
I mean, we released The Pervert's Guide to Ideology because we all love the film. And we did that very differently. We had a satellite Q&A with a film that you'd never expect a satellite Q&A at 35 cinemas. We broke even on that film. It took £75,000 at the box office, which was a huge success for us because our expectations were we would at best break even, and we made about £3,000 on the film. That was a big success. But what you have to recognise is that little documentaries, which I want to show because there is a market and our customers want to see them, but they do not make money theatrically.
So why do you do it then as a commercial operation?
Because we do things for commercial reasons, but also because we have to satisfy what we do, which is giving our customers a wider choice than they get in multiplexes, and because actually we all like films. That's why we do it. We do it because we believe in what we're doing, and we can do that because we show The Hobbit.
Yeah. Just quick question, then I'd like to look down the other end of the telescope from the producer's end. But what was the close period between your showing then of that film and Channel 4 putting Pervert's Guide to Ideology out?
I can't actually remember, but it was short. It was short.
Less than a month?
Maybe a bit more than that, but not long.
Yeah.
Not long. And also, I'd also say that Sophie Fiennes, the director of that film, works so super hard on it, and having that commitment from a director on a film like that is so huge to us, the amount of support and work she did.
And would you have wished that window was your window was longer and it made no difference to you with a film like that?
It doesn't make a difference, but then once you start talking about windows, it's a whole area where it's so complicated, it's so difficult, and you have to protect businesses as much as trying to change things. We could spend 90 minutes on that.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you. So just looking at it now from the seller's side, what do you look for?
Well, I suppose, John, the thing is that the reason that I was absolutely convinced that a film like Royal Paintbox, a film like Hermitage Revealed, was cinematic and we could make it for the cinema and we could do that was partly because we wanted to take the audience where it hasn't been before. The audience wants to go where it hasn't been before, and here was a way of taking them there. And in a way that I don't think I know that in the case of Hermitage Revealed, we would never have got that away on television. We just never would, because the slots for feature-length single auteur documentaries are virtually none.
We've got some on Sky.
Well, you have now, but when we started doing this, you didn't.
But basically, I've been out of this, coming back into this world after a long absence. I mean, there's you and Nick Fraser, basically, isn't there?
More or less. Channel 4 sort of seemed to have exited stage left in this territory for all sorts of reasons, which I'm sure make a lot of sense to them.
And also, I suppose the other interesting thing is that we're working in an area which is essentially has been described as the tumbleweed of television. And the tumbleweed of television means that you're in the desert. And yet, we're arts filmmakers. We're going to create, we're going to find a way because we're creative people who come up with creative solutions. And so it just seemed to me that here was this wonderful opportunity to do something cinematic for the cinema, and there are a number of other factors which helped with that. The fact that we have the tax credit is suddenly, on the kind of budgets that we make these films on, is quite significant, really significant. And that only comes by making a film. And a film actually is not a live event, which we discussed earlier. A film has to be a film, it has to pass the cultural test, it has to get minimum 16 points out of 32, and it has to be a film and not a live event. So all of these things together, the fact that television appeared to be a closed book, it's opening up now, the fact that the tax credit was there, the fact that we are creative producers, the fact that we, had a long history in international co-production as well, and we're used to working with multiple partners. All of those factors combined, really, it's sort of an interesting time. That's what I wanted to say.
Can I say a little bit, from the point of view of a director, approaching, this may be the tumbleweed of television, but just looking at the example of Royal Paint Box, which also went out on ITV in a cut-down 1-hour version to an audience of 1.5 million on a Sunday night. No, it was a Tuesday night at 10:35. So you can compare the audience you get on television against the cinema. I call it a version. It's not really a version. It's its own entity. But as a filmmaker, I had to approach making the film quite differently. It reflected in my post-production budget. You have many more weeks. You have to make the DCP. You have to do a transfer from 25 to 24 frames, which is quite a complex process. You can't do very many pans. It all flickers. So there's also the thing that's slightly disappointing to me as a filmmaker, because I do shoot a lot myself. I do a lot of handheld alongside the crew, and I use these, small handy cams, which, if you're shooting in the dark, attract a lot of noise. And even just looking at the clips here, we've got a screen down here, but looking at some of the bits that are blown up, they're just not very satisfactory on a big screen. So as a filmmaker, I have to look at really providing a sort of quality, and I think particularly I do a lot of art, and I like to feel that art is a fabulous thing to see in the cinema, a close-up of a painting blown up huge on a screen in the dark just looks unbelievable, and that's an experience that you'll never have in an art gallery, and the chance to sort of look at it over and over again and understand and know paintings, is just very exciting. So that's a lovely development in the field that I know.
Do you need to shoot that in 4K if you're going to project it on a big screen?
Well, with the Hermitage, I went back to Russia and reshot a great deal, on better cameras, all the Steadicam stuff. I really, really had to sort of bracket, very thoroughly to make sure that I was going to bring back to England a sort of material that was really going to look good. And I think you've seen a trailer that's, it looks fabulous, but there are parts of the film where I like to feel that it's got a more personal, my sort of sense of exploration as a filmmaker is there, and that's in the body of the film, but some of those are on cameras which are, less easy to take around the place or underground or behind the scenes and so on. So those are sort of challenges that I'm finding. And also musically, I do all my films, I get composers to score them specially, and so it's really exciting to watch a film and see, listen to 5.1 sound and be in a cinema and hear, something that's been recorded by a whole orchestra in Russia, and to sort of have that immersive experience that music brings in the cinema. So I started talking about money a bit, because it does mean you have to plan, you have to plan what you're doing, and really make sure that there's a good reason to be there. I've been to some of these events and been disappointed. I don't know if I should name names, but some of these sort of... Well, I think the Pompeii British Museum was done... It was just like a bad outside broadcast BBC. There were presenters everywhere, and I really felt I was disappointed, because I couldn't see the art, and I just felt this feels like I'm seeing television blown up. So I'm sorry if anybody here...
As a director, is there and maybe it's impossible to say, is there a clear distinction in your mind about the characteristics that go into making a long-form piece of content for the cinema as opposed to TV, whether that's Sky or the South Bank show or Imagine or whatever?
Well, I think, I do try and work with people who've done longer feature films, with editors who understand the story, because it's about story. It's a lot longer, to make a 90-minute film, and you can't just sort of extend it arbitrarily, because it just doesn't stand up.
I think
so
also
it's about character and story, really, is the key thing, and I'm just sort of thinking about my next bunch of projects and just thinking about things that really are going to lend themselves and there's a 3-act structure and there's enough going on, because I do think you notice that in the cinema a lot more.
I think that question of pace as well, because when you're sitting in a cinema watching a big screen, particularly if it's artworks and so on, you really want to look at them because there's more to see, because you're looking at huge pictures. And I think with television, there's cutting something for television, people tend to cut a bit quicker. And also depending on the channel, you are confined by different slot lengths, considerations about commercial breaks and so on and so forth. So you have to think about things in a slightly different way when you're dealing with something for television than you are for the cinema, both in terms of the technicalities of the shooting, the technicalities of the editing, the technicalities of the deliverables, and you certainly are going to be in the world of versions, which has an impact on budget and so on. So it does have to kind of be thought of as a universal project from the beginning, that there are going to be segments of, rather than, we'll just make that, and then we'll make that, and then we'll make that, and then we'll make that, without thinking about it all at the front, is quite a difficult challenge. And it'd be quite interesting to hear about, I don't know if any of you have done projects which have started off as one thing and become another. And it is a very different process, rather than conceiving something at the beginning and then, either this one happens or that one happens, but the main thing happens. It's a very different way of looking at things.
Celia, is it in any way a useful distinction at Sky HQ in terms of when you look at a project and think, has this thing been conceived of in the director's mind as something for the cinema as opposed to what I want on?
We're really clear. Partly, we I have a very small team, and when we announced that we're doing a one-off documentary film strand, I just knew that we just wouldn't be able to cope if everybody who normally makes those one-off TV films came to us. We just wouldn't be able to deal with it. We haven't got enough people. And we'd be swamped by TV ideas, which have home in true stories and placed on Channel 4. And also we wanted to have a higher bar than that. And so there was a kind of very practical, let's set the bar really high so we don't get drowned with pictures. But also let's set the bar high because that's what the bar is on Sky Atlantic. So I think, when we're considering ideas, and obviously we see ideas from the very first initial conversation with filmmakers to treatments, to sizzle reels, to rough cuts, to actually acquiring finished films. So we see all these films at a variety of different stages. And obviously it's much easier when it's finished than when you're talking to somebody or something on paper. But, there's lots of sort of artistic storyline. Is the storyline epic enough to actually sustain? Is there a strong enough narrative? Has it got enough to say? And they really do need to have much bigger ideas behind them than a normal TV film. I think the talent is also really, really important. Is that person actually going to be able to articulate this vision, not only from a narrative point of view, but from a stylistic point of view? And then there's kind of a really, and so, all those things that you would expect, and I'm sure you don't need me to kind of go into much more detail about those, because I think you understand, you've been to the cinema, you understand what the difference is. But fundamentally, there's one final filter that I just find incredibly useful. I just go, would I pay £10.50 to go and see this on a wet, miserable November Saturday afternoon? And if I genuinely don't think yes, then it's a really kind of hard-nosed but sensible filter. And so I sort of, if I'm in dilemma, I sometimes resort to that, and it is amazing how effective that is from sorting the wheat from the chaff, really.
Yeah. Which neatly takes us back to Claire. How do you work your filter? Because that's what you do to figure out whether your audience, the picture house audience, is going to pay £10 for this.
Well, I agree. It's whether or not somebody's prepared to put money down to go into the cinema and see whatever it is we're offering them. So, what I would say is that there's a team of 10 programmers, and we've got an alternative content department as well, and we see everything. We're out there, we're talking to people, we're involved with people who are, in Henley and phone up the manager and says, can I see whatever it is? I got an email that came via Clapham Picture House about a film that a customer had heard about. And actually we are showing it. It's a tiny little film, and we're doing it for a favour for the distributor, because none of us thought it was very good, but we're actually doing it as a favour for the distributor. And
I'm sure the customer wasn't that distributor in his local cinema.
No, I'm a believer. So yeah, I mean, I think it's all about engaging, and it's engaging and not sitting in an ivory tower just saying the studio's releasing this film and it's great publicity and great marketing job. And of course that's one aspect of it, but it's just keeping one's eyes and ears to the ground, eyes open, ears to the ground, and watching as much as you possibly can.
I mean, there's a bit of gut in there too, isn't it? It's a bit of gut and a passion, and I think as a commissioner or as a distributor, anywhere in that chain, if you don't have the kind of gut feeling and the passion for a film, then it's not the right film for you. It doesn't mean to say that you won't find a different home for it, but I do think you need that passion, because to get people behind content like this is hard. It's really difficult to get people to come out and support your content. So you need to have a fire in your belly, and you need to protect that content, and you need to look after it, and you need to make sure you can do the best for it for the filmmakers.
I think one of the reasons that we went into distribution, apart from the fact it makes sense to join everything up for us, having cinemas, is that there were films I was seeing in festivals that were really good, that weren't having an opportunity to get into the UK and be seen. And sometimes those films, like My Afternoons with Marguerite, is not a film of my personal taste. Gerard Depardieu, a film for an older audience. But we have audiences that are still underserved. Older audiences are underserved. There are lots of good reasons for distributing films to make sure that we have enough of the films that our audiences actually want to see. And we're in a fantastic position in that we're not feeding a machine. We can buy films and projects that we all actually like and believe in. And it's a great place to be.
I remember many years ago when I first met you, which must be about 7 years ago, before you were at picture houses, you'd actually put your finger on the fact that there's a huge audience that was going completely under the radar of the statistics. And they were, in pockets all around the country, unable to get to cinemas, but, perfectly able to get to the local theatre, which would have put on the odd film show. And, that sort of thing was going on at a very grassroots level. And I think now what's happened is that has kind of crystallised a little bit more. And you were talking about the Matisse, John, and somebody came up to me the other day and said, "Oh my God, the Matisse, it was so wonderful. I had a telephone call from my sister in Llandudno who'd seen it, And it was just like, suddenly I thought, my God, this is the engagement with the audience is, I think, one of the most exciting things about being involved with films that go in the cinema, documentary films that go in the cinema. Because when you make films for television, we make them, we give them to the broadcaster, they're shown once or, twice on catch-up or whatever it might be, and we never really hear anything more. We never get really much feedback, or you just never, there's a kind of a stop, a full stop. And I think what has been very interesting is this prism of the access to the audience, and also the audience feeling that they can have access to you as the filmmaker, particularly when you've done Q&As. I mean, that has been really interesting, and you learn so much. It is amazing. So that it's almost like that divide that the disembodied broadcast experience, we kind of leapfrogged that, because people go to a cinema, they sit in a cinema, they engage with the screen, but they engage together. And I really noticed this when Cave of Forgotten Dreams came out, and it was a big light bulb moment for me, that at 6:30 on a Wednesday evening, the entire Gate Notting Hill was full. It's a 180-seat cinema. It was full. And it was full of people who, had heard about Werner Herzog and probably knew his films and were interested to see his new film. And it was in 3D, which at the time was quite a big thing. But also because there was an added element, which was that the one lady from the British Museum who'd actually been in those caves and knew about them and knew what it was like physically, personally herself to go on that journey that you saw on the screen, came and talked to the audience about it. So suddenly there was a kind of added value that the audience really appreciated, and it was a real light bulb moment for me, that.
We should open this up to questions. Before we do, there's just one other thing I'd like to touch on, because I think it's important when trying to think about the right projects. The distribution pattern for most alternative content event cinema, not all of it, but most of it, in terms of the business plan, tends to assume an international release. And again, as part of the beauty of digital, it is now relatively easy to deliver a film on a global basis into 30, 40 territories simultaneously. And I just wondered whether any of the panel have reflections on that from their perspective. I mean, Picture House, you're kind of in that business, and it must raise issues for the filmmakers as well in terms of your audience. So maybe we just have a couple of minutes on that and then open the whole thing up. Claire, why don't you?
Well, I mean, again, this is the thing that's changed really in the last 2 or 3 years, is the idea that now when I go to festivals, I'm not necessarily thinking just about the UK. I'm thinking about, well, how does this fit worldwide? And because for us, our first experience of that was the Royal Shakespeare Company, which we made the decision, rather than get an agent in the US to do the selling for us and to do the same in France and Switzerland and whatever, that we'd do it ourselves. So we're actually building relationships with cinema owners across the world, and we're learning about that as we're doing it. But I think for us at Picture House, it is absolutely not about just the UK anymore. It is about rights, and again, it comes back to windows, it comes back to piracy, it comes back to making the best of marketing materials. It's about partnerships. So going forward, this is a business that is global. This is not a local business.
Yeah, and certainly, I mean, I could say from the Arts Alliance perspective, we're not particularly interested in investing in shows that in any way have a solely European, a UK focus, because it's quite difficult to make the numbers add up, to put it bluntly. So content that works in different territories is great. The other thing we found out is, which is just a nice to have, is that you can make business plans work without the US in them, which is also helpful. That there are different cultures and communities that can come together and provide, very interesting and quite significant levels of audience that doesn't require on having to be big in the Midwest, which can be handy. So we've overrun on our bit, but let's open it up. We've got sort of 20, 25 minutes if we want it. Who would like to?
Everybody's
put a hand up.
Hey, well done.
Is that John? Hello, John.
Hello, I'm John Archer. I produced a story of film, which was very hard, apart from your help, John, actually, at the beginning, from the UK Film Council, very hard to finance in the UK, but has now sold to 30 countries around the world and has had a cinema release in Italy and other places, and we've made our money back, and it's into profit. That's just by the way, but it falls into this pattern.
Well done, John.
What I'm interested in, I live in Scotland, and I don't get to the National Theatre very often, so the relays are really good. I can go to Stirling and see opera or theatre. And I noticed, I think, that the production of Titus Andronicus from the National Theatre possibly made more money than the Ralph Fiennes film, Titus. So there's going to be what's the future? Is cinema, as in film production, going to be threatened by these relays?
No.
Thank you. Good. Has the BBC rediscovered this in their policy of arts at, back to OBs? Is that the same thing, or is it different? How do these windows come together? And what is the space there for independence? If we want to go out and make these things, does the National Theatre do its own? So is that cutting out a whole host of our work?
Well, personally, I think it's all about opportunities and recognising that, yes, everything is changing. I think it's interesting Tessa Ross is going to the National Theatre. I think things will change in that way. I think independents have a great future, but I think independents have to look at how they do things. That's really the reality. And there will be casualties. There will always be film in cinemas, I believe, but it's just going to be different, and the landscape will be different. And how that maybe it's always said there's too many films made, and maybe that's true, but maybe they find different platforms to show on, so that there are films that you see on your iPhone and there's some you see in the cinema. Simple as that, really.
I think it's also about originality, and I think it's a really interesting point that we don't want to keep redoing old things, Titus, over and over again, and we want to have new ideas coming into the cinema and new, completely original stories. So that maybe will be a result of this.
Yeah, I think, John, just two other observations from Arts Alliance perspective. One is that my understanding is that the BBC has an open mind on this subject. I mean, the BBC, as Claire mentioned, Doctor Who, my instinct is it surprised the BBC almost as much as it surprised everyone else, but it was a hell of a success. And I think with the BBC...
I'm sure if they did Sherlock, they'd have the same thing. It's about fan base. Yeah. It's all about fan base. We chat about Game of Thrones occasionally, don't we? We've just got to make that happen.
Yes.
Because there's a huge fan base. And I think, in a way, in a kind of a throwback decades ago, it's like, the audiences used to go and see Rocky Horror Show. And they used to turn up with the umbrellas and the whatever, all that McGubbins. And I think it's a similar sort of thing. If you've got a TV show that has a massive, passionate fan base, then I think it can transfer into the cinema really easily.
I think the question for the BBC, and I say it's absolutely no more than a question, there's a cultural shift, I think, that has to be made in the minds of commissioners. Now, clearly Sky's made it, otherwise, I guess, Celia wouldn't be here today. But it's getting beyond that kind of channel control as this is mine, I've paid for at least 40% of it, and I want it to be on my channel before anyone on the planet sees it. And I think if people can start to
understand... And the other way around, too. I mean, I think, distributors have to get over that, too.
Yeah, I think that's right. But if you look at a BBC, which, in my mind, which is moving towards an iPlayer model, the corporate mind of the BBC, which is less and less about channels, it seems to me, and saying, this is BBC content, and our job is to make sure that audiences have the opportunity to see it wherever, then you would have thought that the corporate brain starts to move towards cinema rather than away from it.
If you look at the increase in on-demand at Sky just in the last year, it's a fairly clear message.
But you mean that people come...
That people
in their own time.
On demand is on a trajectory like that. So people know what they want and they want to have it when they want it. And I think that is an increasing thing. It doesn't seem to be having any particularly detrimental effect on the actual live schedule. Because there's so much out there now. It's hard to keep up. It's hard to know what to watch. The night that you are actually thinking, God, I'd like to sit on my sofa and watch a bit of telly, that might not be the night that Game of Thrones is on. So, it's I think it's a modern way of working, and I think it will change everything. But I think the most important thing is that people are desperate for content, and they're willing to get it in, and they don't care how they get it. They get it in a way that suits their lifestyle and their mood on that particular day. And if they want to go out and have a theatrical experience, they'll do that. If they want to download it onto their iPad and watch it on a train to Scotland, you could do that too. So I think it's all good. It's, I think we can get very tied in knots about platforms, and actually I think it's just about, when I get a letter, I don't care whether it comes by motorbike or van or helicopter or whatever, I just want my letter, and I think it's that sort of thing.
Yeah, and I think your other question, John, about the subsidised sector, I think that's seems to me that as this sector becomes more mature, that question is going to bubble up, and increasingly independent producers are saying, if you want to be hard-nosed about it, zero cost of capital to develop these products. They come out. The other side of the coin, of course, is these organisations would rightly say that they've had their budgets slashed to ribbons and they're under enormous pressure from the state to maximise their revenues and find other ways of making money, plus the fact that if you're a large London-based organisation, putting your content out to the regions is a fantastic kind of tick box in genuinely providing access to people
kind
who
of
are a long way away
I
from
think it's an obligation in many ways for these big public institutes. London's like a different country to the rest of Britain. I think it's an obligation that we are. London is generous with its cultural heritage and its cultural content because it's just packed to the gunnels of it. And that's just crazy that they're not doing it. So I applaud it a lot.
We played the D-Day celebration from the Albert Hall last week on Friday, and it's taken £250,000, and the appetite for that in the regions, not so much in London, but in the regions, was phenomenal. And the opportunity for people to see an event like that, you actually feel this is a fantastic place to be, that you get people out to a big major event which is important. It's important for all of us, the D-Day celebrations, and there's people out there who are able to take part in something that they wouldn't have been able to take part in 10 years ago.
Thank you. Yes, please.
Yeah, hi. We've made 10 feature docs, as well as some TV only. Most of the feature docs we've made have had, they've all had festival release, and most have had some cinema release. And yet every single time we pitch, as it were, or talk to anyone on the basis of cinema, we face the same question again and again and again. Why is this cinema not a regular TV 1 hour? And we've got our answers, and you spoke about some of those things as well. But to me, I feel always it's kind of an unfair question. But I wonder if the panel thinks it is a fair question, and how...
Who's asking that question? Theatrical distributors and investors, or TV commissioners?
Oh, no, not TV commissioners, because it's not their concern, really. In fact, they would rather they kept it on the small screen, and they're sometimes reluctant to offer a window for theatrical, although that has been changing. But if we go to Creative England or BFI or any of the kind of big screen concerns, then we do face the question every time. And it feels an impossible question to answer in a way that, we can talk about pace and we can talk about scale, but actually some of our best results in cinema have been with films which, when you look at them, you would think probably, they're shot on quite the kind of handheld cameras and so on, and they don't necessarily have the scale in visual terms, or the production values even in sound, and yet the stories are very compelling and perhaps are nearer to a 3-act structure. And they've packed out, NFT1, for example, absolutely full, not a seat in the house, and then done a cinema run of 20 cinemas or so, and then gone on and had life in DVD. But if we were
pitching... Are you going to name the films? Just so I can get my
The English Surgeon, my own film was Shed Your Tears and Walk Away, which started at London Film Festival and filled NFT1. They, Out of the Ashes, they get Grierson nominated, sometimes as cinema category. And yet every time we go to pitch and we say, well, we've done 10 cinema docs and they've had releases not only in Britain but elsewhere, we still face this kind of wall of folded arms and skepticism as to why we think it might be suitable for cinema. And of course,
what do you say to these people who ask you these questions?
Well, we say the kinds of things that you were saying earlier about the scale of the story, the depth of the story, the emotional core of the story. But we always feel as if we're kind of reading from a script, and that they've heard that from every single person they've listened to that day.
So do you think that it's that you've got a proven track record that they should give you credence for that and go with your vision?
Well, to some extent, but I personally feel it's an impossible question. There's like in Star Trek, there's a question that separates those who will become fleet captains from those who won't, and it's an impossible question, and Kirk cheats, and that's how he becomes a captain. And you kind of feel like you're in that position. You're being presented with a question just to see how much you squirm.
Yeah, now you're getting back to the pirates on the street corner.
I think it's about ownership, and it's your film, and there's always going to be this battle between, television and cinema. Who owns it? Who has it first? I mean, that's something we didn't talk about, with sort of the timing of it. You have to create a theatrical window that often, if you've made something that's been driven by television money, you don't have enough time to release it in the cinema. And I found I was sad, because my film about Lowry, which actually has, it didn't get, we didn't allow enough time to have a theatrical window. But I think if you stand your ground, you can make it work.
Well, I think it actually goes even further than that, Margie. I think what's happened is that the single film on television has been, in mainstream television, a lot of mainstream television, the auteur has been replaced by the presenter. And so that's why you get a sort of directed presenter, and is kind of like a person between the audience and the director, as it were. And I think that's rather a difference.
As somebody that gets pitched to all the time, I'll tell you why they ask you that question. Because it's a sort of a default, slightly lazy kind of standard. It's just, and I think what's really going on is they just want to hear your pitch, and it's just a way of trying to extract from you what your pitch is. And I don't do that, because I think my job is to help you make it into something that does work for me. Rather than trying to, it's just that sort of, I think it's just the arrogance and the ennui of being a buyer, and I think buyers very easily forget how bloody hard it is out there, how difficult it is to get money, how hard it is to get these projects together, especially when you're doing something with big ambitions. It slightly drives me nuts, and I know it's out there, and I hope I don't do that to people. But I think it's almost a bit like going for a job interview and somebody saying, "So, why do you want the job?" It's that kind of thing. So I'm sure it's really irritating, but I think you've just got to think of it as a sort of bog standard interview question. It just shows lack of imagination on the buyer's part. But I think it's just one of those tedious. And I know when you're pitching, it's just really the worst thing is to pitch somebody that's looking bored and not interested, not on your side. And I'm sorry that happens.
Well, no, I confess that, because we get so many approaches with people saying I've got a feature doc, it's always a passion project. And we ask the same question, why is it a feature doc, not a TV 1 hour? Because quite often it's somebody telling us about a member of their own family, or some experience they've had, and so on. And we kind of have to think, well, you're asking us to put 2 or 3 years of our lives into fundraising for you and producing for you, and we can't automatically see why the ambition is for cinema, where you'll get a tenth of the audience you'll get from, one Storyville broadcast.
And I mean, that is the other thing, that you can chase cinema release, and it's actually, how many people do you want to see this? If you want to get to a mass audience, then television is a much more powerful way of doing it than cinema. So I do think there's a kind of a sort of self-validation that some filmmakers want by having their films in a cinema, and not all of them are up to that.
It would be a great answer to give, wouldn't it, if somebody said, "Why is this for cinema?" I'd say, "Well, for my own personal self-validation."
I'd love that. I'd love that. I'd be like, "You've got the money. I like your chutzpah."
I just want to say
we've got time for one more, and then we're going to
Can
have
I
to
just say one thing?
Can we just get the mic over here while Maureen speaks?
I do think that Claire hit the nail on the head, because you always have to say, "Would I pay £10 to see this film?" Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm Donald Toms. I'm from PBS, and I'll tell you is that the theatrical release subject and question is at our desk every day these days, and we actually work with it with our brand division, because we tend to think that if you have a TV show and you're working with multi-platforms, that when you end up having a theatrical release or a cinema release, it really does help the program. I think 10 years ago we would say, oh, absolutely not, because the cinema release is going to take from the broadcast. And we find it just in the reverse these days. So if you're out there first with a cinema release and it gets a great buzz, different writers will write about that because it's in the cinema. And then when it comes to television, you get the TV writers who are writing, and it seems to work. So we actually do it these days. And sometimes I wish that we would actually have the conversation first, you know, before we greenlight the program. But let's face it, as a TV programmer, I'm more concerned about the TV show. And then when I get, let's talk about the theatrical release, we're already thinking about the schedule, it going into the schedule. Because what it does, it then delays the TV schedule. So I advise that that conversation go right up front. Because if you're talking about multi-platform and you're talking about the brand and the scope of the or the journey of the project, it should come just up front.
So you're speaking to Claire's earlier point about joining it up, basically.
Yeah, and also, you know, if you were to ask a distributor 10 years ago why they release films in cinemas, it was for the DVD release. It's a shop window, that's all it is, you know, for them.
Yeah.
I mean, forgetting about customers wanting to come and all the rest of it, it's a shop window, and why it wouldn't be the same.
Because the scheduling question, I mean, that's one of the reasons why our documentary films are scheduled in 2 batches, one in the spring, one in the autumn, because we very quickly realised that we needed to follow the market. So effectively, we are in spring and autumn, because broadly speaking, we expect the big films to be at Toronto and then go theatrical and then do TV, and then we expect the other batch to go Sundance and then theatrical and then come to us on TV. So we specifically scheduled our strand to allow for that time.
Yeah.
And you know, it only becomes a problem if films go late, which they always do. But
Of course.
And there we must pretty much leave it. I want to just end by asking everyone to maybe just do 30 seconds. But the question is this: if you jump forward 3 years in your mind, what would you like your company, your business's relationship be in 3 years' time with event cinema? Foxtrot.
Well, I mean, I know what I want to be showing in 3 years' time, you know, and just thinking about this, I mean, I want to do, for example, I want to make a film with John Galliano putting together an opera which becomes a cinema film, preferably Wagner, and this is an ambition I have, to make something for the cinema that's absolutely theatrical and made for the cinema, and, you know, with a great sense of character and process, and I think this is something which will reach a wide audience. So that's an example of what I'd like to be showing in 3 years' time.
Thank you.
And I suppose from a practical and producerial point of view, it would be lovely to be able to have those joined up conversations. I mean, actually, from our perspective, we have had quite joined up conversations already, because we've been working with Donald and we've been working with you, and we certainly had worked with Picture Houses before, and we'd love to work with Celia, of course. So it's kind of starting, and I would like to think that in the next 3 years that it would become actually quite a regular thing and an easier thing, and that these difficulties about windows and so on and so forth, which actually Donald wasn't a difficulty at all, will have smoothed over, and I'm sure they will, because the financial and economic imperative is there.
John Galliano and Wagner. Yes, exactly. I've been trying to get John Galliano to tell his story, which I can enable him to tell his story.
Okay. Offline, please. Thank you. See you.
I'd like to see institutions, distributors and studios and television people all understanding that we're in the same business and we are not detrimental to each other.
Thank you. Claire.
Well, it's just absolutely. So partnerships, more partnerships, global partnerships, and adventurous and exciting and risk-taking.
And there we shall leave it. Thank you.